Welcome to the Multicultural Mindset broadcast. Your host is Dr. LaVerne Hanes Collins, a licensed professional counselor, award-winning trainer, and keynote speaker. Dr. Collins is the author of Overlooked: Counselor Insights for the Unspoken Issues in Black American Life. Dr. Collins has also been a featured monthly columnist in the American Counseling Association's Counseling Today magazine with her Honoring Diversity column. Now, here's Dr. Collins.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Multicultural Mindset, where we explore the topics of race, faith, culture, and trauma as related to the mental health of Black and Brown Americans. I am your host, Dr. LaVerne Hanes Collins, and I'm so glad that you decided to join in today for our podcast. Our goal is to present topics that help counselors grow out of the mindsets that don't serve our racially identified practice communities well. That's right. I want you to outgrow anything that you've been taught that blames Black communities for problems that are actually caused by racism. I want you to outgrow anything that suggests that Black and Brown people or any people need to be fixed instead of fixing the prevailing ideologies that we were taught in grad school. And I want you to outgrow anything that points to biased deficits in Black life, Black culture, Black people. Instead, I want to help you grow into a multicultural mindset that makes your counseling culturally attuned to the diverse range of cultures and backgrounds of the people whom we serve. Today, we're talking about supporting the success of students of color in higher education. And my guest today is someone I'm thrilled to have a conversation with in the person of Dr. Terrell Strayhorn. Dr. Strayhorn is a scholar and influencer, a thought leader in higher education. He is the president and CEO of Do Good Work, LLC, as well as a professor, a researcher, and administrator in higher education. He's a public speaker, a TEDx presenter. He holds his Doctor of Philosophy in Higher Education from Virginia Tech. He is presently a professor of education and psychology at Virginia Union University, where he also serves as the director of research in the Center for the Study of HBCUs. And if there is anyone who understands today's topic about supporting the success of students of color in higher education, it is Dr. Terrell Strayhorn. So Dr. Strayhorn, thank you so much for being here today. So glad to have you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Collins, and it is my great pleasure to be here on your podcast and to be connected with you in this way, given all of the connections that we've had over the years. I am inspired by you, by your passion, by your energy, certainly by your zeal and your smile, but also by your commitment to changing the narrative about our students, about what happens to students, and how we can create more pathways for their success. I'm looking forward to today's conversation. And I think it's particularly critical at this point in time.
Yes, it is. And we're going to talk about these issues broadly, and then we're going to get down to what these issues mean today and new things that have come up. So thank you. I'm humbled by your kind words as well. The work you have done in this space is such an important work. Tell us about your background and your journey. What was the journey that brought you to have this interest and this passion that you have for this work?
Yeah, so my work, I see it as deeply rooted in the lived experiences of historically underserved, underrepresented, but Listen, we were just talking about this in the pre-show about the power of words. And so when I was in my graduate program at Virginia Tech, shout out to Virginia Tech, go Hokies, I got great training, I thought, in methods and theory and practice. But my doctoral advisor, Don Creamer, when he graduated me, told me, he gave me a charge. He said, look, I don't care what you end up doing. I don't care what role you have. I just want you to make sure that when you go out here, you do good work. That's been the inspiration for my consulting firm. It is my hashtag. It's so many things because it was my advisor who gave me that wisdom. And he sort of ushered me into a profession that I knew nothing about. But having now been here, believe it or not, 18 years almost, heading toward the 2-decade mark, here's what I've learned is that this enterprise of education, K-12 and higher education together, is a system that we need access to. Jobs of today and tomorrow depend on access to this system. The skills that we need, I know we're going to get to it, but I think the world needs a whole lot of skills development. We got to learn how to disagree and to resolve conflict peacefully. We have to learn how to, and learn again, how to listen actively, not listen so I can say something more or listen and wait for my turn, but actually listen to what Dr. Collins is saying. Grapple with her contributions. Find the points of agreement, but sit with the points of disagreement. And then think about how can we democratically and peacefully have a conversation where we can be candid, but we can still be civil, where we can raise questions, but not raise fists. These are very fundamental principles, and I think there are implications for teachers, for counselors, for all of us in it. But it really rests on trying to understand the experiences of people as they move through this pathway. And so to your point, my work is really, it's quantitative, it's qualitative, it's theoretical, it's practical, but I'm trying to unearth and understand the experiences of those who are historically underserved, underrepresented, but also those who have historically been pushed out, forced out, silenced, oppressed. Here's the part that's going to be hard for some folks in the audience: harmed and hurt by us, the educators in the system. And so sometimes the work is, pleasant and it's fun and it's exciting and it's, relatively easy to do. But there are also times where the work is difficult and it requires me as the researcher to hear gut-wrenching stories and then to figure out how do I then communicate it to educators and counselors and principals and leaders in ways that, first of all, they can hear me. Because, I know, I think this is important to share. So I'm a professor, I'm a public speaker, I'm a professor of education and psychology, but I'm also a man of faith. I'm also a preacher. And I remember as a small kid, there was an evangelist who came to my hometown and told my mom that her and my dad had to, sort of wrap their arms around me and raise me up because I had a message for the world. And I would travel all the world sharing my message. Of course, as a Pentecostal preacher, the only thing I could imagine with my 9-year-old mind was I was going to be a pastor of a church. And Reverend Collins, Dr. Collins, I got to tell you, I was on a plane, about a decade ago, and I had a conversation with God, the source and animator of my life. Doesn't mean that that's for all people, but for me, that's my source. And so I thought, when I was 9 years old, you told me I was going to travel the world and share a message. And I thought I was going to be a preacher. I was going to have a church. I was going to be, I don't know. And I looked out the window, and I tell this story sometimes. I broke down to tears because I realized I had been waiting for that moment to happen while I was yet living it. That I had this very, rigid and small, relatively small idea of what that could look like. And here I am traveling all over the country, spreading the message of belonging through my research and my writing, and missing that I was living the very sort of calling that I feel is placed on my life. And so I say that to say that's the journey that brought me to this work. It's people say like, why do you do it? How do you keep your energy up? I think partly because I don't see it as just work. I see it as part vocation. Partly because I realize that I've met a lot of educators like those in your listening audience who are passionate. They care about student success. Sometimes they just don't know what to do, or they're working up against forces that sort of get in the way of us being successful. So my research and my advocacy is really driven by this sort of urgent need that I understand that we have to dismantle systems
Mhm.
in this system that was not built and designed for any of us and create environments where our students can thrive and succeed. So the work is both deconstructive, where we're tearing down and removing process walls and barriers and things that get in the way, while also being cool and creative and innovative to build new supports and scaffolds. And so I do that with a mix of data, information, public speaking, podcasting, teaching in the classroom. And I want to close with this. I'm here on your podcast because one, I believe in you, I believe in your vision, I believe in your mission, but to all in your listening audience, and hopefully I'll share it with her too. I'm also here because of Miss Laurice Yarn. She was my high school counselor. My first and only, hopefully I don't get choked up, right? She is my first and only African American counselor. And I don't even remember my other counselors throughout school, to be honest, but I remember Miss Yarn not only because she's still my Facebook friend, not only because I went to her city to give a keynote and my high school counselor showed up and remembered me and supported me, but because Miss Yarn built connections with me as a student. I came to know that I could trust her. She was one of the first people, yeah, I'm gonna get emotional. She's one of the first people to share with me information about college and told me I should go. She reached out to my mom and dad and told them when I should take the ACT and the SAT. She talked to my mom and dad about preparing their son for a place that neither of them had gone before. And it's that now we call it yeah. We call it intrusive advising, right? But Miss Yarn was doing intrusive advising, intrusive counseling, trauma-based, trauma-informed counseling well before it was a thing. And so a shout out to every single counselor like yourself and those in your listening audience. You got to know that you make a difference.
Wow. I thank you for that. Thank you for sharing that amazing story. There are a lot of aspects of my journey that sound a lot like yours, some that are different, but boy, everything you said just resonated with me, and I'm sure it's resonating with other people too, especially for me, the part about having a pulpit
Mm,
expectation set for me. And I do still minister from the pulpit. But I tell people all the time, the counseling session is my pulpit.
mhm.
These podcasts, these are my this is my pulpit. And what you're doing, I'm so grateful for it. You've had pulpits wherever you're sent. It becomes a pulpit, as you said, that message of belonging, which for people of faith is so critical, but often overlooked
Yeah.
as essentially the core of what Christianity at least represents. So I appreciate the way you are seeing your life in an integrated way. I really respect that, the integration of everything in your life. When we speak of student
Yeah.
success, and
Thank you.
that's your area, what does that mean? And is it important to look um, at Black student success or student success for students of color differently? Why or why not? What does it mean? And it's important to look at student success for people of color differently.
Yeah.
Yes, no,
That's a
and
great
why or why
question.
not?
So student success for me is sort of the primary driver and outcome objective of all things in education. I've interviewed teachers, I've interviewed counselors, I've interviewed presidents, provosts, faculty members. I've even interviewed some, and when I say interviewed, I mean interview might be a formal interview. It could also be a survey at parents. And what I know is this: every single person wants their student to succeed. Students want to succeed. Parents want the best for their students. So do aunties and uncles and cousins and administrators and educators. And student success generally is referring to, um, you know, sort of key metrics of student success include things like, you know, whether or not the student gets good grades, they're retained and promoted through grades and college on time, and do they ultimately achieve the degree, whether that's the high school diploma, the middle school certificate, or the college degree or advanced doctorate, right? So my research has really provided a roadmap for institutions to help them move beyond the rhetoric of student success and to take real
Beyond the
action.
rhetoric.
Yeah. Which is, lots of it. I haven't met an institution yet, school or district, that's not saying they're about student success. But many of them miss that it's not just our words and an espoused commitment to it. The question becomes, what real actions are we taking to get to know our students, to identify their needs, and then to build or supports and provide the supports and services they need to be successful. Here's the thing I'm trying to level set. Everybody needs assistance.
Mm,
Everybody needs help.
mm,
Everybody has needs. And I write about it in the belonging book, right? So in special ed and sometimes even in counseling, but I know in teacher prep programs, they often talk about students with special needs. Everybody has needs. Some of them we might label as special, but quite frankly, everybody's needs are special. Everybody has special, like I am I'm a vegan. And I wasn't vegan when we met, but I'm vegan now. I've been vegan for 8 years. I got special needs when I go to a restaurant. I can't eat everything that everybody else can eat. And I think if we could just normalize that language, then it allows us to stop trying to put people in boxes, which only limits their possibilities in their imaginations, much like I was telling the story earlier. And it opens up new possibilities. It also allows us to see connections, right, between student groups. Because to your point, I've told that story about how belonging is my message and so forth, and that as a Christian, it really resonates with what I believe fundamental principles of Christianity are. Um, I was just in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and Hindu man came up to me and he said, "Listen, I don't know if you know this or not, but in the Bhagavad Gita, which is their sacred book, it talks about belonging, community, connectedness being at its core." Well, I was somewhere else and someone said, "You know what? These are fundamental principles of so many world religions that, we sort of, our success and our well being is tied to the well being and success of others." Martin Luther King said it. We don't get there until we all get there.
I
I
get
don't know
there.
what you need to hear to see the connection and the linkage between our humanity, but here's the thing we got to know is that every single student in our care wants to be successful. Many of them, especially for Black students, have a bunch of people who are rooting them on and investing in them and pouring into them. And it's not just mom and dads, although moms and dads are amazing and great. But I was in um Cleveland, Ohio, and met a mother who said her son was going off to college. He was the first in the family to go. I said, "Oh, that makes him first generation." She said, "Why?" I said, "Because he's the first in your family to go." She said, "Well, what if he's the first in our entire church to go? What is he then?" I said, "The first in your church?" And with tears in her eyes, she said, "Yeah, in fact, on Sunday, the pastor took up a special offering and hundreds of families in the church gave in that offering to help this mom, who's a single mom, pay his tuition." Now imagine that student who goes to that school or to that college with the responsibility and the weight and the pressure of hundreds of families who want him to
Mm,
come back. First of all, come back safe, come back
mm,
alive, because you got to talk about that
okay.
today.
There you
come
go.
back with a degree in hand, to
There you
all of
go.
the educators and the counselors. That's why our support and our work is so important, because we're enabling the success of students like this. Here's what we know: Black students face, significant challenges in schools and colleges. Their success rates are not equal and the same as their white and Asian counterparts on average. That still today, about 50% of Black men graduate from high school. Half. That does mean that upwards of about half do not. Okay, then we have that those who,
That's startling. That's wow. I didn't
yeah, and of
realize
course,
that
these are national
number.
numbers. So that someone will say,
Yeah,
well, what,
yeah.
at my high school, like my high school, Kempsville High School in Virginia Beach, Virginia, that was not the statistic. It's higher than that. But what it does call attention to, which we need to pay attention to, there are Black students who do not finish high school. Those who finish, many of them aspire to higher education. Some of them enroll in higher education, but 2/3 of African American men, Black men, who enter higher education leave before they complete their degree. They have some college but no degree, like the young man that I'm talking about in Cleveland. So the question becomes, okay, what's the cause for those differential outcomes? What's the cause of the success and the failure? Well, if you listen to too many people, they'll say things like the students aren't ready for college. And no doubt some students would benefit from additional opportunities to learn that would equip them for college, right? Two, some people say, well, money matters, and it does. It costs to go to college, it costs to get through school, and some students don't have the resources to be successful in college. But that's not my research shows that even when you take into account those kind of factors, you're only explaining about half of the departure puzzle, which
Mm.
means there are Black students who leave who had the grades to be there and they had the money to stay. So then the question becomes, well, then why did they leave? And what I've been able to show through my research is there are social, environmental conditions, mindsets, heart sets, policies, and
Mhm.
practices that not only act as barriers to their success, but that push them out. Messages, policies that don't meet their needs. And so these policies, practices, and conditions are not equal for all groups, right? So some messages and policies, for instance, there are one form of support that really sort of increases student success is, and it's right in your wheelhouse, it's advising and counseling, right? And all students benefit from advising and counseling. Counseling that can sort of give them a pathway, counseling that can help them manage
I
their
was going to say if it's
emotions,
good
counseling.
counseling.
Yeah, good count. There it is. Good counseling, right? And then we should unpack what good counseling means, right? But traditional kinds of forms of counseling can generally help the students, general students, succeed. But when you take Black students or Latinx students or students who were born elsewhere, they have different histories with the helping professions.
Mhm.
And this is hard
Mhm.
for some people to accept because
Mhm.
it requires us as professionals to own our own professional history, right? Like counseling and advising and the medical profession have not been kind to the Black race, to the Black community. I mean, there have
Not at
been
all.
unethical experiments in our history. There have been unfair and inequitable, inaccurate diagnoses. There have been mistreatment and maltreatment. I mean, also malpractice. I mean, all sorts of things have happened that have racial patterns to it, right? So then, no surprise that parents, aunties, uncles, and students come to our schools with with varying levels of trust and distrust toward the counseling and the advice that we provide. And when we take generic approaches to this work, it doesn't respond to that historical trauma. It doesn't respond to that racial history. it doesn't even respond to the racial reality of these students, right?
That's right.
So, I remember when I was in high school, I'll even go back to Miss Yarn. There was a time where one of my teachers, my calculus teacher, I won't say her name. I really want to, but I won't. So my calculus teacher, one time when she met me, she said, "I've never had a student like you." And I didn't know what that meant. I'm a small guy, so I thought maybe she meant little people, small people. And then I took a test. On my test, I second guessed myself. I had the right answer, and you can see I erased. I still have this test to this day. I don't know when. It's been a long time since I've been in high school, but I still have this test because it was a turning point for me. On my test, I second guessed myself. I erased my response. I put something else. My high school calculus instructor marked it wrong and put dumb move.
Mm, mm,
I took it home to my mother. No doubt my
mm,
mom will watch this podcast because I'm gonna send it to her.
mm.
And my mom, people say I'm small, I'm the fun size. My mom's the funner size. She went out to that school like so many black moms and dads have to do, and she advocated for her kid. And she found a partner in Miss Yarn who didn't deny the reality that I experienced, who wasn't unrehearsed or afraid to name racism, discrimination, unfair treatment, inappropriate behaviors. You got to have courage if you're going to sit in these seats. You got to have a fluency with talking about these things. And so, I don't think she probably got that from her traditional guidance counseling preparation and training. And that's why we need. So when I hear trauma informed approaches and when I hear culturally relevant pedagogy and approaches, that's what I'm thinking. We need teachers and counselors and school leaders and district heads who understand that this stuff still happens and can use that information to create fairer opportunities for students. So this is my way of saying, yes, we must look at it different when it comes to Black student success because their lived experiences are different.
A
Our
difference.
perceptions of them are different. And maybe even if ours are not, we all know our colleagues. Here's the thing we got to know. I'll stop on this point. Race and racism are real. They do matter, both in this country and outside the country. I've traveled enough now that people got to stop saying race doesn't matter in other countries. The moment I landed in Rome, Italy, no shade to the Italians. I love it there. I would love to go back. But the moment I landed, someone said, "You're Black. You're Black from America." Went to South Africa. When we checked in at the hotel, the guy knew I was Black from America. So race does matter. People see it and they pick it up. And it shapes our experiences and it shapes the experiences of our students. It allows some students to always be ahead, to always be presumed competent, to always be assumed right. It denies other students the opportunity to even have their voice heard, for their hand to be called on, for them to ever be, presented information about college, about scholarships. And for that reason, we have to think about success differently. It's not about just getting a diploma. It really is
Mhm.
about holistic development, belonging, and for me, equitable access to resources, the resources that we all provide as educators.
Oh, my heart is singing and dancing with you as I hear everything you're saying. I am so passionate about all of this, and I love hearing your passion for all of this too. Um, so some of the things you're saying are the walls that I know I hit sometimes and you hit when we hear people, talk about, well, everybody has the same opportunities. And when you hear things like, well, let's just go, we should be colorblind. No, I don't see you as Black. Yes, you do see me as Black. Don't say you don't. Yes, you do. Because if you didn't see me as Black, you wouldn't have said that. Um, and this, I'm big on trauma informed care. So when you talk about that, I say whenever you're sitting with someone, you've got to look at them and you've got to see if they're a person of color, you've got to see the intergenerational story, heart story, even if you don't know the facts, the details, you've got to see and hear the intergenerational heart story and allow that allow that to be a part of the lens by which you see a person and you appreciate the heart story, you appreciate what it took for them to even get there, just like that young man who spoke up being the first in his church. Wow, powerful. We can talk all day. I got one last really important question for you. You've done such a wonderful job of talking about your research and what you've come to up to today. And then there's today. And when I say today, I mean today's culture where everything is now allowed to be valued. It is in any way identified as a way of strengthening odds and institutions of higher education. Tell us from your perspective where we are, what we need to do to get where we need to get.
Wow. What a,
I know.
short and succinct question, but it's a huge question and it's so important. It's so timely. And I want to say it this way. It is, it's one of those moments in time in our history where I believe the answer to this question, our lives do literally depend on it, especially the lives of our students. I teach a graduate seminar. Last night in my class, one of my students, who's a teacher in an urban school, raised a question. During the question, she broke down into tears because she said they're doing raids in her school and they have a protocol for how they're going to handle that. And she teaches in an elementary school. And she's just talking about how the gut-wrenching pain and the breaking of her heart that, she literally is not just being asked to teach. Come on, friends. She's not being asked to teach. She's not being asked to just deliver a curriculum. Right now, she's also the protection for these young souls. That parents aren't calling her asking what's the homework and when is the parent-teacher conference. They're calling during the day to check on, is everything okay? Is my kid safe? Is there anything I can do? So again, I'm going to, channel the spirit that I know is in you and in this show. Hats off, shout out, love and light to every single educator, all of our counselors, all of our leaders across this country who are doing good work and doing the right work of taking care of these students who, we've been entrusted with. So to the heart of your question, the last couple of weeks have been very busy. We've seen a lot of executive orders. Even today, we've seen more come out. When I look at the executive order, these are the short names of them that really speak to the elimination of wasteful spending on DEI initiatives. The one that's about defending women and gender issues, the one that proposed a federal freeze that has now since been rescinded, and then even those now that threaten in many ways the federal programs that so many of our students need. I think there are several things that we must do to support our students, especially our students of color, particularly our Black and Brown students in the weeks and days ahead. One, watch this podcast and many of the other episodes and keep watching them. Put them on repeat. Because one of the things I told my students last night in class is we've got to have a vocabulary We've got to have a working vocabulary about all of these terms. Look, diversity, equity, and inclusion are not bad words. They are not political
No.
terms. They're not political perspectives. Diversity is simply this. We have credible evidence that when people who are different come together and they are allowed to show up and glow up, as I like to say, as their full selves, the best inventions come out of that exchange, the best kinds of ideas and solutions. And we don't have to go that far to see this in action. All you got to do is go back to the Flint water crisis. Look at what happened there. It was when the city planners and the environmentalists and the engineers and the educators and the elected politicians got together in Flint that we solved the water crisis. It's when they listened to the grandma and they also listened to the business worker. All of our perspectives matter when we come together and we have channels and mechanisms for input and exchange, and we can be candid but civil, and we can debate but be honest. Good stuff happens. That's simply what diversity is about. It's about giving every single person access to resources. We said earlier, I don't think student success is a mystery. Not just my research, tons of research over the years have made it quite simple. You want students to be successful? It's a matter of access. And if you all want to, if we want to parrot the term opportunity now, I'm okay with that, except we got to admit everybody's opportunity is not equal. Opportunities are not equal. Some people, listen, I in my high school, I had, I don't know, something like a dozen AP courses available to me. I thought that was true of all students, Dr. Collins, until I got into my graduate program and realized there are some students who go to high school, they don't have access to AP courses. They don't have access to advanced and honors courses. They don't have access to the college prep curriculum. And then there are colleges and universities that have checklists that say, if a student has this kind of course and this kind of experience, and they are eligible for admission to our college. Well, if a young person just is born into an area where they're zoned to a school that simply doesn't offer the courses that they need to go to college, that's not equal opportunity. Student success, it's not a mystery. It's a matter of access. It's a matter of
Right.
opportunity. But here's the hardest part for all of us in these conversations. It's also a matter of institutional will. We have to have a will to activate the way for them to be successful. We know what our students need.
Institutional will. I love that.
Institutional will.
Institutional will.
Yeah, because we got lots of people. There are lots of good people on this side. I told a reporter yesterday, she was doing what you in your work and podcast push back against. She was giving me the deficit narrative about students of color. Their scores are low, their test scores are low, they drop out of school. And I said, listen. There's data to suggest that some of that is true. But let's not miss the assets, the strengths, the values that many students of color, particularly Black students, bring with them, the cultural wealth that they bring, their ability to stand flat-footed and plainly planted in Black culture while navigating multiple cultures, white spaces, and spaces that are different for them, and they are able to adjust their lexicon and their linguistic ability while still knowing how to, look, I know how to talk to my auntie at the cookout, and I know how to speak to an audience at a national conference. And I never want to lose that. I know how to
Right.
activate the audience in a Black church, and I know how to activate an audience in a classroom. And I never want to lose that dexterity. But people ask me all the time, were you a part of Toastmasters? Did you take a public speaking class? I say no. I'm Pentecostal. I used to go to a Baptist church. My grandma was a Baptist mom, and my mom and dad always had a flavor for energy and excitement. So there's just, and that is an asset, and that is a wealth. Listen, you may have to change glasses to see it, but that is a strength that has enabled my success.
Yes.
And so we've got to appreciate that in the days and weeks coming ahead, we cannot allow the people to play the okey doke with us, right? And tell us that diversity is bad. It's a political statement, that equity is unfair, that inclusion is about white people losing their seats or jobs that they're not even looking for anyway, or that there's something called a Black job. We just have to be clear that we know what we're talking about here, that, our hearts, my heart, I'm sure yours too, and mine's go out to all of the 67 passengers and families whose lives were devastated by the tragedy in DC, the collision of the American Airlines plane and the military helicopter. But moments later, politicians started sprinkling DEI all over that, as if to suggest that there was evidence that somehow, one, this tracks back to a person of color, it tracks back to a DEI program. Got to be clear, So one, sharpen your tools. Make sure you have a working lexicon and vocabulary for diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and that you can stand about it. You can talk about it. You can talk to your colleagues about it. You can talk to families about it, because I think these are values that everyone believes in. Two, stay vigilant and be mobilized. I think there are lots of policy shifts that are happening right now that disproportionately impact communities of color, that harm Black students, Black faculty, Black staff, especially those that have to do with programs that were designed to redress existing inequities. We came out of Brown versus Board of Education and realized that although schools were legally desegregated, they were still de facto segregated. My high school calculus teacher was telling me that when she said, "I've never had a student like you," she's saying, "I never had a Black student in calculus at a school that is award winning. It was a great high school, but very, very few Black students ever made it to AP calculus." And that's a problem. And rather than look at what's wrong with Black students that keeps them out of calculus, we got to change that question to, what do we need to be doing as schools, as communities, and as colleges to address that problem so that many more can have access to these courses. So we've got to be mobilized. We have to be vigilant. We have to ask the tough questions. I encourage everyone to read and to think about what our students need. Hopefully folks in your audience are at schools and in districts that are using data to drive these decisions. Get to know your students. Stay close to them. This is the time to stay close to them. And you don't have to, I don't mean close in proximity, although sometimes that is what I mean. I mean close enough to know how these policies, these executive orders are impacting them. Are they worried? And what are they worried about? Are they feeling threatened? And what can we do to help? Is this throwing water on their aspirations and their imaginations for a future? And then we get to the table. This is good work, I think, for teachers' conferences and for teacher staff meetings and for professional development days and even for counselors to huddle and say, what do our students need? And then to build a plan for providing it. Just the other week, I was with 18 African-American young men in Houston in a mentoring program. And I went around the room and I asked them, I said, so many of you are in high school, what do you want to be when you grow up? Out of the 18, over half of them wanted to be professional athletes. Most of them want to play for the Houston Texans, which is, okay, that's not uncommon. Now, even though I asked some of them, are you an athlete now? They said, oh yeah. I said, what's your record? Dr. Collins, many of them had really bad records. I mean, they're not winning a lot of games, but they aspire to be professional athletes. So I then took the rest of my time not to tell them you'll never be a professional athlete. And I got to say this, thank you for the opportunity on your podcast. Educators, counselors, principals, superintendents, professors, presidents and provosts, we have to stop telling kids that they can't be something. I can't tell you how many people told me I would never be a professor. I'd never be a vice president. I'd never be. I don't have this. I don't have that. And I'm not saying it to gloat. It's just one day I looked in the mirror. I used to tell people in my public lecture, I say, it's impossible to become something you've never seen. And one day when brushing my teeth, looking in the mirror, I realized I'm looking at something I've never seen.
Never seen.
So it's not impossible. I'm not saying the road wasn't bumpy and there weren't hills and mountains I had to overcome. And through love and support from family and friends and good supporters like you, Dr. Collins, and many others, I was able to make it. But I've met too many students in my interviews and in my surveys who say, a teacher told me I can't do this. A teacher told me I can't play pro ball. No, we got to stop saying that. We motivate. I'm not saying you can't have real talk conversations with them, right? Let them build, I'm quoting, paraphrasing, who is it? Henry David Thoreau. Let them build their sand castles in the air,
Mm,
but then
mm,
work with
mhm,
them
mm.
to put the foundation under them.
Under,
Sometimes the
yes,
dream comes before the plan, and that is
that's so good.
okay. We
That's so
celebrate
good.
Martin Luther King because he had a dream. He also had a plan, but his life was cut short because he was never able to live out that plan. I've encouraged people, listen, we're in the helping professions for a reason. I think the one thing we can do to support students in the days ahead is support, don't hurt, help, don't
Mhm,
harm, you know,
mhm,
encourage
mhm,
their aspirations and motivations,
mhm,
help them feel safe and secure, but work with them to start putting plans in place. I tell students all the time, I was talking to them that day. I said, so one of them wants to be an entrepreneur. I said, an entrepreneur of what? What's your business? He told me his business. I said, and what's going to make you the right person to have that business? Who do you want to sell to? Another guy said he wanted to be a real estate agent. I said, what kind of houses or real estate do you want to sell? He said, I want to sell houses. What kind of houses? Luxury houses, big house. It's never too early. Oh, let me say this one because my mom reminded me this is helpful. There are lots of young people in our care who, right now, because of the power of social media, say things like, I don't want to go to college. I want to be a social media influencer. I don't
mm,
want to, I don't need to run my own business. I want to be a TikToker. Well, ask
mm,
them this. Okay.
mm,
And what's
mm,
your message? Who's your
mm,
audience? What
mm,
technology and team do you need to power
mhm,
your TikTok business? What's your plan for getting there? How many people you got now? When are you going to start
mhm,
making those moves? We got to
mm,
ask these questions, meet them where they are.
mm.
But I think
In
those
other
are helpful
words,
questions that don't go ahead.
yeah, no, I'm going to cut you off. Go ahead.
Those are the questions that don't tell them they can't, but it pushes them in their thinking. And that's what we've done as educators. I think if educators do nothing, we're really wonderful guides on the side that help students discover themselves and for themselves what
Yeah,
their next is.
yeah. You know, what I was thinking, what I was going to say is that what you are describing is a way of validating the
Mm,
individual. And so often when we hear things that sound disconnected
mhm,
from traditional paths, we invalidate the vision. But in a young person, when you invalidate their vision, you have in many ways invalidated their personhood.
yep, yep,
And that is a grave mistake that society pays dearly for.
yeah.
I have and we have to wrap up in a minute, but I have a friend who is a very successful neurosurgeon, and they recently went back to their old high school and remembered that the guidance counselor told them they should just be a nurse. And she is now one of the leading neurosurgeons in the United
Wow.
States. Child,
Yep.
adolescent, I guess it is, neurosurgeon, studied
Yeah.
under names that we all recognize. Um, Another friend in my undergraduate um, school was came out of public schools in New Jersey and was told, Miss So and so, if you don't understand what I'm speaking of in this English class, you have chosen the wrong university or something to that effect,
Mm,
right? Because it was English and it was something she was struggling with. Not because she's a highly intelligent person, maybe just didn't have the foundation that, in those early years, because of funding where she was and many other factors. But anyway, um, she took that and she became an English teacher.
you see? You see? It's such a powerful reminder to all of us, which in my, professional development workshops with teachers and educators, I do the same. I share stories of um, of the counter narrative, the
There you
student
go.
who took that message and converted it through their
Yes.
own sort of reflection and soul searching into the fuel that then powered their achievement of their dream.
Yes.
And
Yes.
every now and again, the universe will be so gracious to us and it'll give us an opportunity to come back and stand in front of the very people who said we
Yes.
couldn't and show that
Yes.
we did. Because it seems impossible, right?
Yes.
Until it's done.
Yes.
That's just a
Yes.
constant reminder to us that, listen, our students, contrary to popular belief, are filled with talent and gifts
Absolutely.
and
Absolutely.
assets and strengths. Now, listen, here's the other thing we got
Absolutely.
to level set. Everybody has weaknesses. Everybody has rooms for areas of development and improvement. You mentioned in there the
Mhm.
struggle. I try to help people understand everybody's got to struggle. Everybody's got a hill they got to overcome. But for those who are counselors and advisors and teachers, quoting or paraphrasing a poet, when we work with students, we have to appreciate the hills and mountains they had to overcome
Mhm.
to
Mhm.
get there. I've interviewed students who, by the time they show up in high school, by the time they show up at the middle school, they have helped clean the apartment, sent their younger siblings
Mhm.
off to school,
Mhm. Mhm.
locked up the apartment, walked to school,
Mhm.
4, 5, 6 almost full-time jobs. And then they get
Mm.
there and then we say, why are they exhausted? Why are they not paying attention? Why are they, drifting off? We have to replace this restrictive, punitive system with one that's filled with love and grace. I'll shut up on this one. And that is,
Mm.
again, so I'll close where I sort of began.
Mhm.
In Christian scripture, there's, I often quote, that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against powers and principalities, wickednesses in high places. And see, I preached that from pulpits, talking more in a spiritual realm, until one day when sitting here at my laptop, preparing for
Mm.
a keynote, and I was thinking, when I go in that room, I know there's some people who believe in the message of belonging, there's some people who don't. And I realize I'm wrestling against powers and
Yes.
principalities in my writing, in my teaching, to anyone who needs to hear it.
Mm.
Listen, through your counseling, you're you're
Mm.
in warfare on behalf
Mm.
of the students and the families that are in your care. And you're fighting against powers and principalities, but they don't look like the mythical things we always talk about. Sometimes the powers and the principalities we're fighting against are sometimes they are legislative policies that deny access to resources that we know those in our care need. Sometimes
Yeah.
it's vitriol and hate speech that's spewed out on social media that sort of pits one group against each other. We
Mhm.
are wrestling. We
Mhm.
are fighting. So to
Mhm.
each and every one of you who's fighting, I say, fight on, good soldier. Knowing this, as I said to my students last night, stepping out of the professor into the personal, I firmly believe that in the end we win. I believe that light drives out darkness, quoting Martin Luther King. I do believe that love wins and it defeats hate. I'm going to remain hopeful even in this moment, for as we move forward in the days ahead, that we will see the good that comes out of people. So don't be afraid to do something, but do something good. As I like to tell my team, do good work.
Good work. What an amazing conversation. Oh my goodness. If this was church, we would be on our feet, clapping and shouting right now.
Yeah, yeah.
Amazing, amazing insight. You are rich with inspiration as well as facts. You are wealthy with encouragement as well as realism. And what an amazing gift. What an amazing gift you have to bring all of that into the conversation at one time. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Um, I am encouraged, and I'm sure our other listeners, as they chime in and hear this, will be encouraged too. It was a timely conversation, and this is actually the fourth and final installment in a series that I've been doing on supporting young people. We've talked to guidance counselors, we've talked to trauma specialists about helping to heal, helping teens to heal from racial trauma, and now we're talking about the success of students of color in higher education. It's been a wonderful, wonderful series, and you were the perfect person to wrap up this series as we talk about how to support the up and coming generation of leaders of color. So thank you,
Thank
Dr.
you.
Strayhorn.
Thank you. Thanks for the
You
opportunity.
have, oh, my pleasure. You have some books. So for those who are watching or listening, I'm going to put his books and contact information on the closing credits so that you can continue to follow Dr. Strayhorn's work and read his material. Learn from it, glean from it, and let it be fuel for you. Again, whether you are in education or not, let it be fuel for you to move forward. So thank you to everyone for tuning in to today's episode on supporting the success of students of color in higher education. I hope this episode has encouraged you as much as it has encouraged me. Remember, creating a safe space for our practice communities, whether they be school-based or community-based, faith-based, means validating the whole person, validating their whole selves, including their racial and cultural identities. Let's continue this journey one step at a time, as I always say, one step at a time. Let's continue to practice with empathy, with awareness, and with a multicultural mindset. Thank you all for joining. Dr. Strayhorn, thank you again. See you
Thank
next
you.
time.
Bye.